Chapter 1. The Invisible Strings. The screen fades in slowly. Shadows bend like whispers. A single heartbeat echoes in the silence. A voice rises, not loud, but resolute. A fire behind every word. This is not inspiration. This is invocation. There is a force that shapes the world. Not with weapons, not with wealth, but with whispers. It doesn't march through the streets or roar from podiums. It speaks quietly, in the space between what is said and what is felt. It moves through every boardroom, every courtroom, every conversation. It's ancient, subtle, and it governs more than laws ever could. This is the psychology of persuasion. But don't be fooled. This isn't manipulation. This isn't trickery. This is the architecture of belief. The foundation upon which every empire, every revolution, every idea that refused to die was built. The ability to move people, to reshape perception, to guide thought, not with force but with presence. And whether you wield it or are wielded by it, is your choice. You think you're free. You think your choices are yours. But every day, from the moment you wake, you're surrounded by invisible signals, nudging you, guiding you, conditioning you. What to wear, what to fear, what to crave, what to believe. The very shape of your desires has been forged by unseen hands. Advertisers, algorithms, traditions, expectations, pulling on strings you didn't even know were tied around your mind. But this isn't a warning. It's a call. Because if the world is built on persuasion, then those who understand it shape the world. Look at history. Not the dates, not the battles, but the minds that moved the masses. Lincoln, with words that cut through war and reminded a nation of its conscience. Carnegie, who turned steel into a symbol of progress through sheer force of belief. Edison, who didn't just invent the light bulb. He convinced the world to dream in electricity. None of them started with power. They started with vision and the ability to make others feel it. That is persuasion. And it's not magic. It's not some divine gift handed out at birth. It's a skill, a psychology, a science, rooted in the deepest layers of human nature. The desire to belong, the need to be seen, the pull of certainty in a chaotic world. To master it is not to control others. It's to understand them. To know how fear moves like a shadow through every decision. How stories bind more tightly than facts. How emotion, not logic, commands behavior. It's to become fluent in the language beneath the language. And once you speak that language, you stop being a follower of the world. You become its architect. But before you can speak that language to others, you must first speak it to yourself. Because persuasion starts in the mirror. If you cannot persuade yourself to rise when everything is falling, how will you ever move the minds of others? If you cannot convince your own soul that it is worthy, that it is capable, that it is more than the sum of its scars, then you will be forever at the mercy of those who can. Every voice that ever told you you weren't enough. Every look that dismissed you. Every silence that hollowed you out. They don't just live in the past. They live in you. And persuasion, true, unshakable persuasion, begins with exorcising those ghosts. With becoming the master of your own psychology. That's the first secret. The greatest persuaders are the most persuaded. They are lit from within. Not by arrogance, but by certainty. Certainty not in outcomes, but in effort. Not in applause, but in alignment. Their words carry weight because they echo with inner conviction. They speak from a place deeper than doubt. A place built brick by brick through pain, failure, reflection, and rebirth. You cannot fake that. You can put on the suit. You can learn the techniques. You can mimic the tone. But if the fire isn't real, people feel it. We are wired to detect the counterfeit. Our brains evolved to seek truth, to follow confidence that comes from clarity, not performance. And that clarity only comes from war. Not the war out there. The war in here. You must confront yourself, not once, but again and again, until your mind no longer owns you. Until your fear no longer directs you. Until your habits no longer decide your fate. You must break the trance of convenience, of comfort, of conformity. You must unlearn the belief that your voice doesn't matter, that your story isn't worthy of being heard. Because your voice is your weapon. Not the loud voice. The true one. The one forged in solitude and loss. In the hours no one claps for. The voice that grows stronger every time you do something hard when no one's watching. Every time you choose discipline over indulgence. Purpose over pleasure. Progress over perfection. That voice, quiet at first, becomes your anchor. And when you speak from it, the world listens. Not because you demand it, but because you've earned it. Every movement in history began with one person speaking what everyone else was afraid to admit. They weren't born heroes. They were born into pressure, into rejection, into doubt. But somewhere along the way, they stopped waiting for permission. And they learned to persuade the most important person in their life, themselves. Because when you believe fully, people feel it. And here's the paradox. People want to be led, not controlled, not coerced, but inspired, shown a higher version of themselves. That is what the greatest persuaders offer, not manipulation, but reflection. Not pressure, but permission to rise, to become, to remember. So if you want to unlock the psychology of everyday persuasion, start here. Convince yourself you were meant to lead. Not with authority, but with authenticity. Not with dominance, but with discipline. Led not from the front, but from within. Because when your presence speaks louder than your words, when your stillness cuts through noise, when your convictions are stronger than the culture around you, people follow. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Recognition of something they've forgotten. A fire they lost. A truth they once felt, but buried. Your job is to remind them. And to do that, you must burn brighter than their doubt. You must walk with more clarity than their confusion. You must be more relentless than their hesitation. That's what persuasion is. Not technique. Not manipulation. Not charisma. Presence. Conviction. Alignment. And once you master it, not as a tactic, but as a way of being, you'll see it everywhere. In the eyes of the silent. In the questions people don't ask. In the choices they make when no one's looking. You'll hear the music beneath their words. You'll see the tension behind their smiles. And you'll speak directly to the place they hide their truth. That's his power. And the world doesn't give it to you. You take it by choosing to master your own mind first. Because once you can lead yourself through doubt, distraction, rejection, failure, once you can bend your own will toward purpose and clarity and strength, then and only then can you move others. And when you do, you don't just change conversations. You change destinies. Chapter 2. The Mindset War. There comes a moment in every life, quiet, unmarked by applause, unnoticed by the world, when a line is drawn, not on a battlefield, but in the mind. It is not a war of bullets or blades, but of belief. A war waged silently between what you are and what you could be. And though no trumpet sounds the charge, make no mistake, this is the war that determines everything else. Because the greatest enemy you will ever face is the voice that lives in your own head. Not the one that speaks to others. Not the one polished and practiced for the crowd. But the one that wakes with you in the morning and walks beside you in the silence. The one that remembers every mistake, every failure, every moment you chose fear over fire. That voice does not care about your goals, your dreams, or your potential. It cares only about one thing, keeping you small enough to stay safe. And that voice is a liar. But it doesn't sound like a liar. It sounds like caution, like reason, like the voice of someone who only wants to protect you. It wraps itself in logic, cloaks itself in concern, and tells you stories that feel true because they're familiar. Stories like, you're not ready. You're not qualified. They'll laugh. You'll fail. And if you listen long enough, you will begin to believe it. You will begin to live in the cage of your own mind, mistaking the bars for boundaries, mistaking fear for intelligence. And slowly, imperceptibly, you will begin to shrink. But you were not built to shrink. You were built to expand. To stretch into the edges of your potential. To explore the unknown terrain of your own capacity. You were not born to blend into the background of your own life. You were born to lead it, to shape it, to claim it, not through arrogance, but through conscious, relentless evolution. This is what mindset really means. Not slogans. Not quotes pasted onto your mirror, but the deep, unshakable commitment to meet reality as it is, and still rise. It is not about thinking positive. It is about thinking powerfully. It is about choosing the frame that gives you strength. Not because it's easier, but because it's truer. Not because it ignores the pain, but because it transforms it. Look at every giant in history, those whose names echo through time not because they had it easy, but because they refused to quit when it was hard. Walt Disney, fired for lacking imagination, bankrupted more than once before creating the very idea of magic that now defines childhood. Thomas Edison, told by his teachers he was too stupid to learn anything, who failed 10,000 times before lighting the world. Abraham Lincoln, defeated in 8 elections before he led a fractured nation to its moral rebirth. What did they have that others didn't? It wasn't luck. It wasn't genius. It wasn't even opportunity. It was mindset. A mindset that did not see failure as a verdict but as a teacher. That did not see rejection as the end, but as redirection. A mindset that asked not, how do I avoid pain, but how do I grow through it? That did not shrink in the presence of uncertainty but leaned into it. That did not seek guarantees, only the strength to move anyway. Because here is the truth the modern world rarely tells you: your reality will never rise above your mindset. You cannot outgrow your own belief system. You cannot execute beyond what you believe is possible for yourself. Your thoughts are not just passing clouds. They are architects. They are builders. And every day, they are constructing your internal world, which will eventually become your external one. So if your thoughts are small, your world will be too. But when your thoughts are forged in clarity, in strength, in the refusal to be defined by circumstance, you begin to live differently. You stop looking for permission. You stop negotiating with your doubts. You stop asking the world to give you what you have not yet given yourself. And you start showing up, not as someone who is hoping to win, but as someone who has already decided they will. Because decision is the birthplace of destiny. But deciding isn't enough. You must defend that decision daily, against distraction, against delay, against the pull of everything that wants to drag you back into the old version of who you were. And that takes discipline. That takes awareness. That takes the willingness to become uncomfortable with your own comfort. Because nothing changes until you decide that staying the same is more painful than the risk of growth. Every day, the world offers you an invitation. Not to coast. Not to conform. But to rise. To take control of the only thing you've ever truly had control over: your response. You cannot control what they say, what they think, what the market does, what the weather brings. But you can control the way your mind interprets it. You can control the meaning you assign. And the meaning, always, is more powerful than the moment. A storm can be chaos, or it can be awakening. Failure can be humiliation, or it can be initiation. Criticism can be rejection, or it can be refinement. What you decide is what you become. This is why most people lose, not because they're not talented, not because they're not worthy, but because they never chose a mindset strong enough to carry them when the world didn't. But you don't have to live that way. You can choose a different path, not of ease, but of alignment. Not of comfort, but of courage. You can become the kind of person whose mindset becomes contagious, whose presence becomes persuasive not because of what you say, but because of what you are. When people meet you, they should feel it. That beneath your words is a will that does not shake. That behind your smile is a storm that has been mastered, not avoided. That within your eyes is a fire that will not be put out by circumstance, by opinion, or by failure. Because when you've built a mindset rooted in truth, in purpose, in personal responsibility, nothing can control you. Not rejection, not fear, not even the past. And once you become that kind of person, once you no longer need the world to believe in you because you believe in yourself, then you become dangerous to every limitation that ever tried to bury you. That is the power of mindset. And it is not something you wait for. It is something you build. Deliberately. Relentlessly. Unapologetically. The voice softens, but not with weakness, with gravity. As if the next breath contains the beginning of something deeper. The journey continues, but the ground beneath the listener has already shifted. Chapter 3 waits, not as a continuation, but as an elevation. Chapter 3. The Power of Belief. There is no force more powerful, more shaping, more capable of bending the very fabric of human reality than belief. Not belief in a religion, not belief in a slogan, but the deeply embedded, unquestioned belief a person holds about themselves and the world they move through, beliefs that act as unseen architects designing every decision, filtering every opportunity, distorting every failure, and defining the edges of what a person even allows themselves to imagine. We live not in the world as it is, but in the world as we believe it to be. Two people can look at the same situation. One sees a dead end, the other sees a challenge. One walks away in defeat, the other leans in with fire. The difference isn't in the event. The difference is in the belief that interprets the event. It's belief that determines whether pain becomes a prison or a path, whether struggle becomes the story of your downfall or the spark that sets your soul ablaze. And the tragedy is that most people never question the beliefs that shape their lives. They live inside invisible cages built not of steel, but of inherited stories and second-hand limitations, passed down by parents who gave what they could but carried their own fears, by systems that taught obedience over courage, by experiences that hurt but were never healed, so they hardened into rules. I'm not smart enough. I don't deserve that. People like me don't do things like that. The world doesn't work that way. And without ever realizing it, those rules become the borders of their lives. But those rules were never truth. They were just beliefs. And beliefs can be rewritten. Every great transformation in history, every disruptive breakthrough, every radical leap forward began with someone who believed something different, who looked at a world full of limits and refused to accept them as law. Henry Ford believed the automobile could belong to every family at a time when only the elite could touch one, and so he reimagined production itself. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in the content of character at a time when color defined destiny, and he walked into history unarmed, with only belief as his armor. Elon Musk believes humanity belongs among the stars, not because we're ready, but because we must become ready. These are not fantasies. These are beliefs so fully integrated into identity that they refuse to bend to the ordinary. And that's the key. Belief is not a thought you repeat to yourself in the mirror. Belief is the code your nervous system obeys when no one's watching. Belief lives in what you tolerate, in what you pursue, in what you walk away from. It is seen in what you invest in, your time, your energy, your attention. You can say you believe in yourself, but if you delay, if you distract, if you avoid the hard conversations, if you self-sabotage every time you get close to a breakthrough, then your belief is a lie your mind tells to protect your ego from its own fragility. True belief costs something. It costs your comfort. It costs your excuses. It costs the version of you that you've outgrown but haven't let go of. Because when you truly believe in a vision of yourself that is greater than your past, then you cannot keep living like you're still the same person. You have to evolve. And evolution is violent to the ego. It breaks your patterns. It burns your stories. It rewires your entire relationship with fear and failure and worth. That's why most people settle for a life that feels familiar instead of a life that feels right. Because familiar feels safe, even when it suffocates. But those who break free, those who rise, those who become forces of nature in their own lives and the lives of others, they do not wait for belief to arrive. They build it, brick by brick, breath by breath, action by action. They act their way into belief, not because they're certain, but because they're committed. They learn to speak power into their own minds, to challenge every limiting thought, to interrogate every inherited truth, to upgrade their mental operating system daily. Because here's the reality, belief is plastic. It's malleable. It's programmable. Neuroscience confirms what the mystics knew centuries ago. Your mind is constantly forming new neural pathways based on repetition and emotional intensity. That means you can literally teach yourself to believe differently, to think differently, to feel differently. But you must become ruthless about the inputs you allow in. Every conversation you entertain, every headline you absorb, every complaint you repeat is writing a line of code into your mental architecture. And over time, that code becomes your identity. So choose deliberately. Surround yourself with those who stretch your vision, not those who shrink it. Speak words that elevate your frequency, not those that drag it down. Move your body with the discipline of someone preparing for war, because your physiology is the key to your psychology. Read not for distraction, but for revelation. Practice silence, not emptiness, but the kind of silence where your real voice finally gets loud enough to be heard. And above all, act in alignment with the version of you haven't met yet, but know is possible. Because every time you act as if you already are the person you're becoming, your brain rewires itself to support that reality. That's how belief is built, not in theory, but in motion. Belief is a byproduct of aligned action repeated with integrity under pressure. And once you realize that belief is not a prerequisite to action, but a result of it, you become unstoppable. Because now, you don't wait to feel ready. You don't wait to feel confident. You move. You move because every step forward is a vote for the version of you that believes more. And eventually the evidence stacks. The identity shifts. The world responds. People will ask what changed. Why you walk differently. Why your voice carries more weight. Why your presence feels grounded, unshakable, inevitable. And they won't understand that it wasn't magic. It was belief. Not borrowed belief. Not inherited belief. Earned belief. The kind of belief forged in silence, in discipline, in loneliness, in 10,000 unseen decisions that said, I refuse to betray my potential today. And when that belief takes root, there is no force on earth that can stop you, because you are no longer at war with yourself. You are no longer negotiating with fear. You are no longer asking the world for validation. You are the validation. Your life becomes the proof. And that is when you become persuasive in the deepest sense, not just in what you say, but in who you are. You walk into a room and people feel something shift, not because you're loud, not because you're perfect, but because your belief is so embodied, so complete, so anchored in truth, that others begin to question the lies they've been living with. That is power. That is presence. That is the psychology of persuasion at its highest form, where you don't need to convince, you simply reveal. Where you don't pressure people to change, you give them permission by showing what's possible. And the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more belief, real, rooted, unbreakable belief that becomes a mirror for others to rise. And it starts with you. Chapter 4. The Clarity Threshold. At some point in your life, if you're paying attention, if you're listening closely enough to the weight of your own breath, to the friction in your routines, to the subtle ache behind the things you've called success, you come face to face with a question that splits everything apart. What am I actually building here? Because it's easy to get good at the wrong thing. It's easy to climb a ladder fast only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. The world will applaud you for achievements that have nothing to do with who you really are. It will reward performance, not purpose. It will celebrate outcomes, not alignment. And if you're not clear, truly, brutally, internally clear, about where you're going and why, the system will gladly assign you a direction that has nothing to do with your truth. Clarity is not a motivational phrase or a journal prompt. It is the foundation of all power. It is the only antidote to the chaos of modern life, the only shield against the persuasive noise of the world that's always trying to hijack your vision and sell you someone else's. Without clarity, you don't make decisions, you react. Without clarity, you don't create, you imitate. Without clarity, you are not living a life, you are managing a schedule, caught in a loop of movement that feels like progress but leads you nowhere. And most people live in that loop for years. Some never leave it, because clarity costs. Clarity demands stillness in a world obsessed with speed. Clarity demands depth in a culture addicted to the surface. Clarity demands solitude, self-confrontation, emotional excavation, the kind of internal silence that strips away the masks you've worn for so long you forgot your real face. And that's terrifying, because once you become clear, you lose the comfort of confusion. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer outsource your purpose to trends or convenience. Clarity removes all excuses, and that's why so many people avoid it. But if you want to lead, if you want to build something that outlasts you, if you want to walk through life with the kind of conviction that cuts through resistance like a blade, then clarity is not optional. It's the price of access to the next level. And it starts not by looking forward, but by looking inward. Not by asking what the world wants from you, but by asking what your soul can no longer live without. What ignites you in a way that even fear can't suppress? What truth would you speak if no one was listening but your own conscience? What problem makes you angry enough to act, and what future feels so alive inside you that to ignore it would be a form of death? Clarity is not about having the whole map. It's about having an anchor, a direction, a why so solid that even when the terrain gets hostile, you don't flinch. It's the difference between momentum and meaning. Anyone can be busy. Anyone can hustle. Anyone can check off a list and drown themselves in productivity that leads to nothing. But only the clear can move slowly and still feel unstoppable. Only the clear can say no and know they just created more power, not missed an opportunity. Only the clear can stand alone, misunderstood, criticized, doubted, and still move like a force of nature, because they're not guided by applause, they're guided by purpose. And you don't need to know the final version of who you are. You just need to stop pretending you don't already know what your next honest step is. Because deep down you know. You've always known. But knowing isn't the hard part. Acting on what you know is where most people stop. Because clarity makes you accountable to something greater than your mood. It makes you responsible for not just what you feel, but what you're becoming. And that weight scares people. So they go back to the blur. Back to the crowd. Back to a fog of endless options where no single decision ever has to be made. But clarity demands a decision. It asks, what do you stand for? Not what do you like, not what do you enjoy, but what will you sacrifice for? What do you believe in so deeply that you're willing to be misunderstood for it, willing to be laughed at, left out, labeled obsessive, because you'd rather live a life that matters to you than one that's accepted by everyone else? And when that decision is made, everything changes. Not because the path gets easier, but because it gets simpler. Distractions lose their grip. Noise loses its volume. Opinions lose their power. Because now you're not wandering. You're walking. Not aimlessly, but relentlessly. Not hoping, but choosing. And that energy, that clarity, is magnetic. It creates its own gravity. It draws in the right people, the right opportunities, not through desperation, but through direction. Because the world doesn't follow the loudest. It follows the most aligned. The ones who know who they are, where they're going, and why they're not turning back. And make no mistake, there will be days when that clarity wavers. There will be storms that shake your confidence, detours that test your faith. But if your clarity is real, you will not be broken. You might bend, you might fall, you might question everything, but you will rise. Because true clarity is not fragile. It is not a burst of inspiration. It is forged through resistance. It is tempered through discomfort. And it becomes your compass when your vision blurs and your strength runs dry. So ask yourself, not what should I do, but what must I do? What would I build if fear had no voice? Who would I become if I stopped running from my own potential? What would I pursue if I didn't need permission to believe I'm worthy of more? The answers are not out there. They are in you. Under the layers. Beneath the noise. Behind every excuse you've ever used to delay your greatness. The answers have always been there. Clarity doesn't come from finding something new. It comes from remembering what's been buried under your own doubt. And once you uncover it, once you decide to live with that kind of clarity, there is no turning back. Because the moment you commit to a life of purpose is the moment you declare war on the life of compromise. And no matter what you lose, you gain something greater, the ability to look in the mirror every single day and say with unwavering certainty, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and I know where I'm going. Chapter 5. Vision is a weapon. There's a moment, if you're truly alive and not just existing, when you realize that drifting through life, letting things happen to you, reacting to circumstances, adapting to the demands of everyone else's priorities, is not only exhausting, it's eroding the very part of you that was meant to lead. And when that realization hits, when you finally get tired of waking up with no fire, tired of watching other people pass you by, not because they were better, but because they were clearer, you will either numb that ache or you will use it. You will either retreat back into distraction, or you will stand in the storm of your own possibility and ask yourself the only question that ever really matters. What do I see that no one else sees yet? And what am I willing to become in order to make it real? Because vision, true vision, is not a fantasy. It's not daydreaming, it's not positive thinking, and it sure as hell isn't about waiting for the stars to align. Vision is war. It is a conscious rebellion against the inertia of mediocrity. It is the decision to live with eyes open in a world that is addicted to sleep. Vision is not soft. Vision is sharp. It cuts through noise. It slices through doubt. It gives direction when motivation fades. It is the lens through which every obstacle becomes a step and every delay becomes refinement. Without vision, you are at the mercy of your environment, a pawn on someone else's board. You become hyperactive but underproductive, busy but blind. You mistake motion for progress. You mistake reaction for leadership. You mistake survival for living. But vision changes that. Vision rewires your psychology. Vision becomes the internal structure that organizes your energy, your priorities, your discipline, your speech, your habits. It is the difference between running aimlessly and running toward something so clearly defined in your heart that even when you can't see it with your eyes, you still move like it's already real. And let's make something clear. A vision is not something you wait for, it's something you claim. It's not about what the world will allow. It's about what your soul demands. Your vision doesn't need to be convenient. It needs to be true. And truth doesn't always fit inside deadlines or approval or market analysis or polite conversation. Sometimes your vision will look delusional to everyone else, and it should. Because if your vision fits inside other people's understanding of who you are, it's not big enough. If it doesn't scare you, if it doesn't require you to change everything about how you think, how you move, how you prepare, how you rest, how you show up, then it's not a vision, it's a wish. The great builders of history didn't wait for the world to believe in them. They believed in something before the world even had language for it. Nikola Tesla saw wireless energy before we could charge a phone. The Wright brothers saw flight when the experts mocked them. Steve Jobs saw personal computing when people still thought typewriters were enough. These weren't accidents. These were visions that refused to wait for permission. And they weren't born into clarity, they carved it from obsession. They fought for it in silence. They protected it from doubt. They carried it through years of ridicule. Because they understood. Once a vision takes hold of you, it becomes your responsibility to become the person capable of bringing it to life. And that transformation is brutal. It doesn't happen by hoping. It happens by shedding the version of you that was built for safety, for approval, for short-term comfort. It requires that you destroy what is good so you can pursue what is great. It means sacrificing popularity for impact. It means going to bed without applause and waking up with resolve. It means making choices today that won't make sense to anyone for years, but doing it anyway because the future already lives inside you, and it's burning to break through. Vision turns pain into fuel. It turns rejection into focus. It turns failure into data. Because when you have vision, everything becomes usable. Even the setbacks. Especially the setbacks. Because vision doesn't just survive failure, it requires it. The road to something extraordinary is paved in missteps, in course corrections, in lessons you couldn't have learned if everything worked out the first time. Vision gives those failures meaning. It gives them context. It says, I know why this hurts, but I also know why I'm not quitting. And you don't need anyone else to see it. You don't need consensus. You don't need approval. You don't need a cheering section. If your vision depends on applause, it's weak. Real vision is internal fire. It's what keeps you up at night. It's what wakes you up before your alarm. It's what pushes you to do the work when there is no reward in sight. It's what silences your excuses, because the cost of not pursuing it becomes more painful than the cost of discipline. That's when you know you've crossed the threshold. When discipline is no longer something you have to force, it's something you crave, because you know it's the only bridge between your current reality and the future you've already seen. That's the paradox of vision. The clearer it becomes, the more pressure you feel. Because now you know the gap. You see the distance between what you are and what you could be. And that pressure is sacred. Don't run from it. Don't medicate it. Don't numb it. Use it. Let it refine you. Let it carve away what no longer serves. Let it force you to rise. And when the world calls you crazy, when they say you're too intense, too focused, too obsessed, smile. Because obsession is what separates those who leave a mark from those who leave a comment. Obsession is what fuels the long nights, the quiet mornings, the lonely sacrifices that no one understands until the vision is standing in front of them, undeniable, unshakable, inevitable. This is what separates leaders from followers, creators from consumers, architects from spectators. Vision. Not vague, not soft, not conditional, but forged and carried. So ask yourself, and ask with courage, not comfort, what do I see that scares me because I know it's possible? What am I building not because it's easy, but because I cannot unsee it? Who do I need to become to make that vision breathe? And am I willing to start now, not tomorrow, not when it's perfect, not when the stars align, but now, in this moment, with what I have, where I am, with nothing more than the fire inside me? Because if you are, then your vision is no longer a dream. It's a weapon. Chapter 6. The Purpose Engine. There is a point, quiet but final, where motivation runs dry, where discipline wavers, where the fire that once roared starts to flicker under the weight of pressure, fatigue, and uncertainty, and in that moment, when the excitement is gone, when the applause has faded, when no one is watching and there is nothing left to prove, the only thing that determines whether you keep going or walk away is whether you are driven by something deeper than desire, something that doesn't come and go with emotion, something that doesn't bend to resistance, something that remains when nothing else does, and that something is purpose. Purpose is not hype, it's not passion, it's not a passing wave of enthusiasm sparked by a video or a quote or a moment of emotional clarity. Purpose is a root system that holds your identity in place when the winds of life try to tear everything loose. It's the answer to the question, why does this matter, even when it hurts? Why does this path, this mission, this work, this pursuit, this version of me still feel worth it when everything around me says stop, quit, slow down, settle? Purpose is not about what feels good. It's about what feels right. And rightness, in the deepest sense, is not comfort, it's congruence. It's the unshakable knowing that your actions are aligned with your essence, your choices are aligned with your soul, and your life is a mirror of your values, not your fears. People who live without purpose don't realize they're lost until something collapses, until success no longer fulfills, until money no longer motivates, until status no longer secures, until the mask of performance begins to crack under the pressure of pretending, and then, in the silence that follows collapse, they meet a truth they had been too busy to face, that achievement without purpose is emptiness in disguise. But those who lead from purpose are built different. They can endure more, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they've given their suffering meaning. They can sacrifice more, not because they hate comfort, but because they've chosen to trade short-term ease for long-term alignment. Purpose gives pain a place to go. It converts it into focus, direction, fuel. Purpose transforms fear from a barrier into a signal, reminding you of where you're meant to lean in, not pull back. Purpose doesn't eliminate doubt, but it quiets it. Because when your mission is bigger than your ego, you stop listening to the voices that only speak to your insecurity. And the truth is, purpose doesn't shout. It doesn't force itself. It doesn't show up wrapped in clarity. Purpose is quiet. It lives under the noise. It reveals itself slowly, through curiosity, through frustration, through the ache of watching something in the world remain broken while knowing you were built to fix it. Purpose is not always about what you love. Sometimes it's about what you hate, what you refuse to allow, what you cannot unsee, what breaks your heart and keeps breaking it until you finally stand up and say, enough. And when that moment comes, when purpose crystallizes into conviction, your life stops being a reaction and becomes a statement. You stop chasing validation and start embodying direction. You stop proving and start building. You stop waiting for someone to open a door and start becoming the one who makes the path. Because purpose gives you something no strategy ever can: certainty. Not certainty in the outcome, but certainty in the path, in the effort, in the identity. Certainty that you are not just spending time, but investing it. that you are not just taking up space, but creating meaning. And when you lead from purpose, people feel it. Your words carry a different weight. Your energy hits differently. Your presence demands nothing but shifts everything. Because you're not selling something. You're living something. And that level of embodiment is rare, but it's magnetic. It draws in those who've been waiting to remember what they came here to do, because your clarity becomes a mirror, a spark, a permission slip. But you have to protect it. Because the world is full of distractions disguised as opportunities, noise disguised as urgency, metrics disguised as meaning. And every time you say yes to something that's not aligned with your purpose, you dilute your power. You fracture your focus. You lose momentum in the direction that actually matters. So you must become ruthless, not with people, not with the world, but with your own alignment. You must be willing to disappoint expectations in order to honor your calling. You must be willing to be misunderstood in order to remain in integrity with the mission only you can carry. And don't wait for it to be convenient. Don't wait for it to be profitable. Don't wait for it to be popular. Start with where you are. Start with what breaks your heart and won't leave you alone. Start with the moments that light you up when no one's around to see. And stop looking for the path. Start becoming the person who can walk any path with clarity and conviction. Because purpose isn't about the route, it's about the reason. It's not about whether the mountain is steep, it's about whether the climb matters. And when it does, the cost doesn't scare you. The time doesn't deter you. The work doesn't intimidate you. Because you're not trying to win a game, you're trying to live a life that means something. So what is your life pointing to? Strip away the noise, the expectations, the comparisons, the guilt, the fear, the shoulds and the maybes, and ask yourself, if nothing was holding me back, what would I devote myself to so fully that it would break me open and rebuild me stronger every day I chose it? What kind of work would demand all of me, not just my skill, but my soul? What kind of mission would make even the worst day feel like it still matters? That answer, whatever form it takes, is your beginning. And once you find it, once you feel it in your bones, once you start to move with it in your step and speak it through your breath, everything changes. Because now you're not building a life based on reaction or fear or luck or accident. Now you're building a life on purpose. Chapter 7. Discipline is destiny. There will come a moment, when the excitement wears off, when the energy dips, when the goal still feels far and your progress seems invisible, where everything inside you will look for a reason to stop, and in that moment, the only thing that will keep you moving is not motivation, not talent, not even belief, but the silent, often invisible force of discipline, the daily agreement you make with yourself to act in alignment with who you said you would become, not because you feel like it, not because it's easy, but because you've decided that becoming the kind of person who keeps their word to themselves is the most powerful form of identity you can ever build. Discipline isn't a punishment, it isn't self-denial, it isn't the cold grind people mistake it for. It is a form of self-respect so deep, so rooted in love for who you are capable of becoming, that you are willing to endure the temporary resistance of now to serve the eternal greatness of tomorrow. Discipline is the bridge between intention and execution. It is the difference between talking about your goals and being trusted by them. And when you live in alignment with that kind of consistency, your confidence stops being emotional and starts becoming structural. It is no longer something you need to find, because you've built it into the very way you live. We've been conditioned to associate freedom with doing whatever we want whenever we want, but real freedom, the kind that changes lives and creates legacies, is the freedom earned by becoming a master of your own impulses, a master of your own energy, a master of your own time. Because without that mastery, you are not free, you are enslaved to your own cravings, your own distractions, your own cycles of start and stop and excuse and regret. Discipline is not the opposite of freedom, it is the only path to it. And the truth no one wants to say out loud is that you are always being trained, either by your discipline or by your habits. Every day, whether you notice it or not, your brain is learning what to expect from you. Every time you follow through, every time you show up regardless of the feeling, every time you honor a standard rather than surrender to a mood, you are programming yourself to trust your own leadership, and trust is the foundation of self-worth. But every time you break your own word, delay what matters, or abandon what you started, You reinforce a different identity, the one that doesn't believe its own promises. And that's the tragedy. Because most people think their confidence will come back when their circumstances change, but confidence isn't built through comfort, it's built through discipline. Through keeping your promise when it's hard, through honoring your vision when no one else sees it, through doing what needs to be done especially when you don't feel like it. That's where real self-respect is built, not in declarations, but in repetition. In your ability to trust yourself when no one's watching. And it's not about perfection. It's not about being robotic. It's about being aligned. Because discipline without direction becomes punishment, but discipline aligned with vision becomes fuel. When you know where you're going and why it matters, discipline becomes devotion. It becomes a daily ritual of becoming, a quiet vote cast every morning in the direction of your own evolution. It's not something you do, it becomes who you are. Look at the people who move differently. The ones who walk into a room with presence. The ones whose words land with weight. The ones who don't flinch when things get hard. That's not talent you're seeing, it's self-governance. It's the integrity of a person who doesn't wait for ideal conditions to act, who doesn't outsource their energy to inspiration, who doesn't need the world to be fair in order to be excellent. Discipline becomes their way of life because they understand that success is not something you hit, success is something you embody. And when you live like that, the rewards compound. Slowly at first. Frustratingly slow. You'll do the work for weeks, months, maybe years without the kind of recognition or result that keeps others going. But you'll keep going because you're not feeding off rewards, you're feeding off alignment. And then one day the world will notice. They'll see the confidence, the clarity, the capacity you carry. They'll say you're lucky, that it must be talent, that something must have clicked. But nothing clicked. What happened is that you kept showing up when no one else did. You kept building while others were waiting. You kept moving when others hesitated. And now the world is finally catching up to the standard you've been holding for years. That's the secret. Discipline is about becoming undeniable. Not because you shouted the loudest, but because you did the work the longest. Not because you asked for respect, but because you lived in a way that made it non-negotiable. And that doesn't happen in a week. That happens in silence. In discomfort. In mornings where you're exhausted but you still show up. In nights when you want to quit but you remember why you started. In decisions that no one applauds but you'll never regret. So if you're waiting for the right time to be consistent, stop. It won't come. Conditions won't align. Motivation won't last. You don't need the perfect plan, you need a standard that doesn't depend on circumstances. You need to wake up and make discipline non-negotiable. You need to ask yourself every single day, what does the version of me I respect most do right now? And then do that. Not tomorrow. Not when it's convenient. Because now is all you ever had. And the way you use it is the clearest evidence of whether you're serious or just saying you are. That's what separates amateurs from professionals. Dreamers from doers. Pretenders from the few who actually live the kind of life most only fantasize about. Discipline is not just a skill. It's a decision. It's a daily rebellion against everything trying to keep you average. It's the structure that holds greatness in place when everything else tries to pull it apart. And the more you choose it, the less you need to choose it, because eventually it becomes who you are. Chapter 8. The Anatomy of Relentless Action. There's a moment when you realize that all the vision, belief, purpose, and discipline in the world mean absolutely nothing. Nothing. If you do not move, if you do not take what lives in your mind and convert it into something real, if you do not take the intangible fire you feel when you're dreaming and translate it into work, into sweat, into hours, into momentum. This is where most people fall, not because they don't care, not because they aren't talented, not because they don't want it, but because they never learn how to act relentlessly in the face of resistance, distraction, and fear without needing to feel ready, certain, or inspired. They wait. They plan. They overthink. They strategize to the point of paralysis. And in doing so, they mistake movement in the mind for progress in the world. But action, real action, not busy work, not noise, not performance, is the only language the universe understands. You can talk all you want about your goals, your ideas, your big plans, but until your behavior matches your vision, you are only hallucinating. The world does not reward intentions. It rewards execution. It rewards motion. It rewards those who understand that clarity without courage is just comfort in disguise, that belief without movement is just ego, that dreaming without action is just intellectual self-medication. You want to know the difference between the people who make it and the people who don't? It's not intelligence. It's not passion. It's not even strategy. It's that the people who make it stop waiting to feel ready. They act while they're still scared. They build while they're still unsure. They move forward while the voice in their head is still whispering lies about how they're not enough. They don't wait for silence in the mind. They act despite the noise. They don't wait for perfect timing. They make imperfect timing irrelevant through volume, through consistency, through a kind of mechanical, relentless repetition that makes failure just another part of the rhythm, not a reason to stop. And that's the truth no one wants to hear, that relentless action is not always dramatic. It is not always flashy. It is not always Instagram-worthy or cinematic. It is often boring. It is often quiet. It is often the simple decision to do the unsexy work again, and again, and again, even when it feels like nothing is changing. Because deep transformation isn't explosive, it's cumulative. It happens in layers. And every time you choose to act instead of wait, to engage instead of hesitate, you move closer, even when the movement feels invisible. You think people just break through one day? They stack small acts of courage over time. They execute when it's hard. They show up when it's inconvenient. They ship the work even when it's not perfect. And eventually, what looks like a breakthrough to the world is just the next natural result of 1,000 actions taken in silence. You want results? Then stop worshiping inspiration and start respecting repetition. Stop chasing motivation and start building systems that eliminate the need for it. The people who win long-term aren't the ones who feel the most. They're the ones who've trained their body and mind to move whether they feel it or not. They've made action their default, not their reward. They don't ask themselves, do I feel like it today? They ask, what needs to get done to stay in integrity with the future I said I would build? Because they understand this simple, brutal fact. Your future is being decided not by what you say you want, but by what you're willing to do when it's hard. And yes, it's going to feel unfair. Yes, it's going to feel like no one sees your effort. Yes, it's going to feel like other people are winning with less work. But if you want uncommon results, you better be ready to live by uncommon rules. That means outlasting people, not outshining them. That means executing when the attention is gone. That means finding a gear inside you that most people never develop because they've trained themselves to stop when it's hard instead of start. Relentless action doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean doing everything. It means doing the right things with full intensity and no apology. It means choosing depth over distraction. It means deciding that no matter how long it takes, no matter how many times you fall, you will keep going, not because you're invincible, but because your identity has shifted from someone who tries to someone who finishes. When that shift happens, everything changes. Your confidence grows not because you finally reached the goal, but because you trust yourself now. You don't flinch when things go wrong. You don't spiral when you miss a step. You just adjust. You get up. You move again. Because that's who you are now. And here's the most important part. The moment you stop needing action to feel dramatic is the moment you become unstoppable. You stop needing adrenaline. You stop needing applause. You stop needing external fuel. You move from hype to power. From intensity to consistency. From noise to legacy. So stop asking how long it will take. Start asking how long you're willing to go. Stop asking what's guaranteed to work. Start becoming the kind of person who works until it does. Because if you're waiting for certainty, you're already losing. But if you act now, with focus, with courage, with an unshakable commitment to move regardless of the resistance, then you are already winning. Chapter 9. The Power of Adaptability. There comes a point in every pursuit, in every journey worth taking, where your original plan begins to break down, not because you failed, not because you miscalculated, but because the reality you're stepping into cannot be fully understood from the place you started, and it's in that moment, when the map becomes blurry, when the path begins to twist, when your expectations start to collapse, that most people freeze, hesitate, or turn back, because they never built the one skill that determines whether your vision survives the unpredictable nature of reality, and that skill is adaptability. Not intelligence, not perfection, not control, but the ability to bend without breaking, to adjust without losing direction, to evolve without losing identity. Adaptability is not weakness. It is not compromise. It is not a lack of commitment to your goal. It is the highest form of commitment, because it says I will get there no matter what, even if the road changes, even if the rules shift, even if the strategy one love turns to dust, I will stay in motion, I will stay fluid, I will become whatever the moment demands without forgetting why I started. Because rigidity breaks under pressure, but adaptability absorbs it and repositions, recalculates, reframes. People talk about resilience, but resilience without adaptability is just stubbornness dressed up as strength. Real power is not found in refusing to change. It's found in knowing what never changes and being willing to change everything else. Your vision can stay constant, but your strategy cannot. The mountain stays fixed, but the way you climb it must be alive. Because no matter how brilliant your first plan was, it will collide with resistance the moment it meets the real world. And if you haven't trained your mind to pivot with power, your dream will die under the weight of your own inflexibility. Adaptability is intelligence in motion. It is the capacity to respond to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. And that kind of response doesn't come from fear. It comes from awareness. From understanding that the world is not static, that markets change, people change, timing shifts, technology evolves, and if you don't evolve with it, you become obsolete. Not because you lack value, but because you refuse to grow. The people who lead industries, the people who shape culture, the people who redefine what's possible, they are never the ones who insist on doing things the way they've always been done. They are the ones who learn faster, pivot quicker, and execute without emotional attachment to methods that no longer work. And it's not just about external shifts. Life throws internal storms too. Your mindset will shift. Your energy will rise and fall. Your belief will be tested. And if you think being successful means always being the same version of yourself, you will burn out trying to maintain an identity that can't carry you through every season. You must allow yourself to become who you need to be, again and again, without guilt, without resistance, without nostalgia for a past version of yourself that no longer fits the future you're stepping into. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. The most successful people in the world aren't the ones who were always right, they're the ones who adjusted fastest. Thomas Edison failed 10,000 times not because he loved failure, but because he had 10,000 ways of adapting, of refining, of staying in motion when others would have declared the experiment over. Netflix pivoted from mailing DVDs to digital streaming while competitors mocked them, and now they've rewritten the industry. Elon Musk adapts in real time, from rockets to AI to tunnels under cities, not because he's lucky, but because he's adaptive at a level most people are too rigid to even comprehend. These aren't just business strategies. They are psychological models for how to exist in a world where nothing stays still except the people too afraid to move. And the truth is, adaptability starts small. It's in how you handle interruptions, how you respond when your routine is broken, how you act when your plan gets delayed. It's not some grand moment, it's 1,000 micro-decisions to either fight reality or work with it. And when you train yourself to adapt without losing momentum, you become unstoppable. Not because nothing can touch you, but because nothing can hold you. You become fluid like water, strong not in spite of your flexibility, but because of it. But make no mistake, adaptability doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean being aimless. It means being dynamic inside of discipline. It means holding a fixed vision and a flexible method. It means having a standard for who you are, and the awareness to evolve how you execute without ever compromising that standard. Adaptability without direction is drift. Direction without adaptability is rigidity. But adaptability with direction, that's power. That's when you stop being moved by circumstances, and you start moving through them. So if something isn't working, stop pretending it is. If your current strategy isn't giving life to your vision, stop forcing it. If your routines have become cages, redesign them. If your expectations are killing your momentum, release them. You are not failing by changing, You are failing by refusing to. The world is not waiting for you to be perfect. It is waiting for you to become relevant. And relevance is not a trait. It's a choice. It's the choice to remain useful, effective, dangerous, in every environment, at every stage, under every condition. Because the people who adapt are not the ones who merely survive. They are the ones who win, again and again. Chapter 10. The Unbreakable Nature of Resilience. There is a point in every great pursuit, in every deep transformation, in every process that genuinely matters, when the world stops clapping, when the results stop coming fast, when the excitement turns into exhaustion, when everything inside you begins to question whether the effort is even worth it anymore. And this is the place where most people quit, not because they're weak, not because they're incapable, but because they mistook resilience for intensity, because they thought pushing hard for a short time was enough to reach something that can only be earned through sustained, tested, painful endurance across seasons of silence, seasons of failure, seasons of resistance where your ability to keep showing up is not rewarded but required, where the difference between the ones who make it and the ones who disappear is not who had the loudest beginning but who had the quietest persistence. Resilience is not about how you respond to one bad day. It's about how you behave through 1,000 days that all feel like they aren't working. It's not about how you bounce back once. It's about how many times you're willing to rebuild when the collapse becomes normal. It's about how many times you're willing to rise without applause, without momentum, without certainty, because something deeper inside you refuses to let you stay on the floor. That something is not motivation. It's not ego. It's not image. It's your decision. It's the internal, irreversible decision that quitting is not an option, that pain is a process, not a verdict, that discomfort is a companion, not a warning sign, that failure is a chapter, not the final line. Resilience is not about denying how hard it is. It's about being honest with the difficulty and still choosing to walk into the fire because what lives on the other side of it matters more than your need to feel safe. And make no mistake, resilience is not something you hope to feel. It is something you train. It is the daily rehearsal of your response to pressure, the repetition of rising, the conditioning of your nervous system to hold tension without collapse, the building of an emotional structure that does not fall apart every time something inconvenient happens. Most people never get there because they never stay long enough inside the hard thing. They bail when the feedback isn't immediate. They pivot when the process feels slow. They look for a shortcut the moment the shine wears off. But the ones who build something legendary, internally or externally, are the ones who keep going when it feels unreasonable to keep going. Because they've learned that resilience isn't about winning all the time. It's about continuing despite not winning. It's about still showing up after the opportunity falls through. Still creating after the idea flops. Still working after the plan breaks. Still trusting after the betrayal. Still loving after the loss. Still believing after the failure. Still leading after the storm. Resilience is the choice to move forward when the most reasonable thing would be to stop. And no, this doesn't mean you never rest. This doesn't mean you numb out the pain or pretend you don't feel the weight. Real resilience isn't denial. Real resilience includes rest. It includes grief. It includes moments where you slow down. But slowing down is not the same as giving up. There is a difference between taking a breath and abandoning your mission. There is a difference between strategic pause and emotional surrender. One heals. The other decays. You must learn the difference. Because the cost of not building resilience is that life will keep breaking you in the same place. You'll keep repeating the same cycle of almost. You'll keep folding at the same pressure points. You'll keep returning to the same conversations with yourself, asking the same questions, giving the same excuses, watching the same dreams dissolve not because you couldn't have reached them but because you refused to build the emotional architecture required to hold them. And let's be honest, most of the pain in life doesn't come from what happens. It comes from our resistance to what happens. It comes from the illusion that life should be easier than it is. It comes from the false promise that ease equals success, when the truth is that ease equals atrophy. Growth is resistance. Growth is friction. Growth is the confrontation between who you've been and who you're becoming. Resilience is your ability to keep walking through that confrontation with open eyes and steady breath and relentless heart. Because one day, everything you're fighting for will test you at once. The noise will be loud. The failure will be fresh. The doubt will feel permanent. And that is the day you will know whether you've trained yourself to bend or break. If you've built your inner world to endure storms. If you've built your identity around progress instead of perfection. If you've taught yourself that setbacks are not signals to retreat but reminders to recalibrate. And if you have, that's the day everything changes. Because from that point on, the world no longer controls your pace. Fear no longer writes your schedule. Pain no longer negotiates your worth. You become the kind of person whose progress cannot be stopped, only delayed. That's what resilience gives you. The ability to take hits, absorb losses, weather storms, and still rise without resentment. The ability to lose battles and still win the war. The ability to walk through fire without begging for it to be over because you've accepted that greatness was never supposed to be easy, just earned. And once you've tasted that kind of strength, not loud strength, but silent, consistent, pressure-tested strength, you never want to go back. Because now you know what you're capable of. And once you know, you can't unknow it. You can be broken. But you don't have to stay broken. You can fall. But you don't have to fall apart. You can lose. But you don't have to quit. Because resilience is not what you feel. It's what you do. Chapter 11. Learning is the edge that never dulls. There is a hidden cost to success that most people never talk about, and it's this. If you're not relentlessly, obsessively committed to learning, if you are not actively, intentionally evolving your mind, your skill set, your perspective, then no matter how talented you are, how driven, how disciplined, how much fire you walk into, you will plateau, you will decay, and you will be overtaken by someone who was simply willing to keep growing when you got comfortable being competent. Because the moment you think you've arrived, the moment you believe you know enough, the moment you start defending your current knowledge instead of expanding it, you've already begun to fall behind, not visibly at first, not dramatically, but inevitably and in time, the compound interest of your refusal to learn will show up in the form of irrelevance, missed opportunity, and a shrinking capacity to adapt to a world that will never stop changing just because you stopped learning. Learning is not a phase. It is not a box you check off with a few books or a degree or a few online courses. Learning is a posture, a way of standing in the world with your eyes open, your ego in check, your assumptions on trial. It is a daily discipline of humility. It is the internal agreement that no matter how far you've come, there is still more to understand, more to explore, more to integrate, not just because you want to be better, but because if you're not evolving, you're becoming obsolete, not externally first, but internally. You lose the edge, you lose the hunger, you lose the tension that keeps you sharp. And when you lose that, you start mistaking movement for mastery. You start coasting on what worked before, trying to repeat old formulas in new environments, ignoring the truth that yesterday's strategies are useless if they're not recontextualized for today's conditions. And that's the quiet threat: competence. Being good enough to get by. Being good enough to impress the average crowd. Being praised for a level of excellence that's beneath your potential. Because praise is a drug, and if you're not careful, you'll become addicted to being seen as the smartest in the room, the most prepared, the most polished. And the moment you need to be the one who knows everything is the moment you stop learning. But the people who sustain greatness over time aren't the ones who posture like experts. They're the ones who remain obsessed like students. Not because they're insecure, but because they're aware that wisdom is infinite, and every time you think you've seen the whole map, life reveals an entire new continent of insight that you couldn't have even conceived of until you did the hard, humbling work of admitting you don't know what you don't know. And it's not just about consuming information. It's about transformation, about integration, about turning what you learn into who you are. Because knowledge without embodiment is noise. Intelligence without action is just unused potential. You can read 1,000 books, attend every seminar, quote every guru, but if your habits don't change, if your thinking doesn't evolve, if your relationships aren't upgraded, if your behavior remains locked inside old patterns, then you're not learning, you're just collecting information like a trophy room for your ego to admire. Real learning changes you. It destabilizes you. It stretches you into discomfort. It forces you to confront how small your current model of the world really is. And if you're not willing to go through that uncomfortable process, then you'll keep recycling the same 5 insights over and over again, wondering why you feel stuck, why nothing seems to move forward, why your ideas have gone stale. The world is moving too fast to stay static. Industries change. Cultures evolve. People grow. If you're not staying curious, if you're not asking better questions, if you're not seeking new input, then you are choosing decline, even if you're still producing results in the short term. The people who rise across industries, across generations, across eras are the ones who commit to perpetual apprenticeship. They're never too good to be taught, never too proud to ask, never too attached to their current level of excellence that they stop pursuing the next one. They have a student's heart with a leader's discipline. And they protect that heart. They seek out challenge. They welcome correction. They don't flinch when they're wrong because they know that being wrong is the path to becoming more right. They don't run from the complexity of new knowledge. They run toward it, not to be overwhelmed, but to be upgraded. And if you want to live at your edge, truly at your edge, not just a better version of average, you must be ruthless about your learning. Ruthless in what you allow into your mind. Ruthless in what you consume. Ruthless in what conversations you entertain. Ruthless in making sure your environment doesn't feed your ego, but stretches your insight. You must surround yourself with people who challenge your assumptions, who pull out your blind spots, who aren't afraid to ask, "What are you missing here?" Because the people who ask that question consistently are the ones who never stop rising. So ask yourself right now, where have I gotten lazy with my learning? Where am I overestimating how much I know? Where am I confusing repetition with progress? Where am I pretending to be an expert when I should be humbling myself back into student mode? Because once you answer that, once you lean back into learning with the fire of someone who knows they haven't even scratched the surface, then you unlock a power most people never touch, the ability to stay relevant for a lifetime, not by clinging to what you've already mastered, but by constantly becoming someone new, someone sharper, someone wiser, someone more adaptable, more articulate, more insightful, more grounded in truth. That is how you create lasting impact. Not by arriving, but by refusing to stop evolving. Chapter 12. Full Control: The Psychology of Becoming Unstoppable. This is the part where most people think it ends, where the story wraps up, the music swells, and the final words offer closure. But the truth is, if you've made it this far, there is no ending, there is no finish line, there is no mountaintop that makes you immune to pain, free from fear, untouchable by doubt. What you're after is not the illusion of finality, not some perfectly polished life, but full psychological ownership, the kind of internal authority that turns you into someone who no longer waits, no longer hesitates, no longer negotiates with their own greatness. The ultimate form of mind control isn't about controlling others, it's about controlling the only thing that ever mattered: yourself, your attention, your focus, your energy, your attitude, your beliefs, your responses, your rituals, your standards. And once you understand that every day you are programming your brain like a system, that every habit, every word, every thought, every repetition is a line of code you are writing into the core of your identity, then the question is no longer whether you're becoming something, it's what you are becoming by default. Because you are always becoming. There is no pause. There is no neutral. The mind does not wait for your permission. It absorbs, it adapts, it builds, and if you're not intentional about what it builds, then you will wake up one day stuck inside a personality you didn't choose, living a story you didn't author, trapped in beliefs you never questioned, following rules written by people who have no idea what you are capable of. But if you are ready, truly ready, to become the kind of person who cannot be seduced by mediocrity, cannot be controlled by doubt, cannot be broken by setbacks, then you must decide to operate from a different place, a place beyond survival, beyond reaction, beyond social validation. You must stop living as a follower of your past and start living as the architect of your future. And that means taking full responsibility for your mind, every corner of it. Not just the positive thoughts, not just the inspiring affirmations, but the dark, the heavy, the sabotaging loops, the invisible programs running in the background that whisper, "You're not enough," every time you step up to the edge of expansion. You must confront those voices, not with violence, but with leadership. You must take back your mind not by silencing the fear, but by refusing to be directed by it. Let it speak. Let it scream. Let it panic. And then move anyway. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to be governed by it. This is the highest level of psychological power. To feel everything, to see all the patterns that once paralyzed you, and then choose action, choose clarity, choose alignment, choose to lead yourself before you ever attempt to lead anyone else. Because people will follow those who own themselves. People will trust those who are whole. Not perfect, whole. Integrated. Honest. Grounded. Unshakable. And you can only become that person when you stop living in pieces. When you stop dividing your life between what you say you want and what you tolerate. Between who you dream of becoming and the standards you continue to break. If you want to become unstoppable, if you want to master the true psychology of persuasion, then start by becoming someone who can't be persuaded against themselves. Become someone who cannot be talked out of their greatness. Who cannot be manipulated into shrinking. Who cannot be distracted into mediocrity. That kind of power is rare, but it is available. It's available to the person who stops waiting for permission and starts writing their own code. It's available to the one who chooses vision over validation, clarity over chaos, truth over comfort, action over noise, responsibility over reaction. It's available to the one who gets out of the cycle of consumption and commits to building, not just a business, not just a brand, not just a body or bank account, but a mind that no longer betrays them. Because that's where the real war is. Not out there. Not in the economy. Not in politics. Not in your job or your relationship or the algorithm. The real war is in the 6 inches between your ears, and the only question is whether you are its general or its prisoner. Whether you command your attention or your attention commands you. Whether you lead your emotions or they sabotage you. Whether you use your pain as leverage or as a reason to hide. Whether you keep defaulting to patterns built in survival, or you rise into the structure of your own design. And that's what this has all been about. Every chapter, every word, every challenge. It's been about inviting you to reclaim what was always yours. Not the fantasy of control, not the illusion that life will always obey you, but the reality that you can obey yourself. That you can lead your own evolution. That you can wake up tomorrow and choose, really choose, to install a new mental operating system, to interrupt the cycle, to walk away from the excuses that have owned you, to walk into a future no one else sees yet, but you do because it's in you, because it's been in you, because you've seen flashes of it, dreamed about it, felt it just beneath the surface every time your mind got quiet enough to listen. That is your signal. Not from me, from you. That is your signal to stop consuming your life and start commanding it. To stop surviving in a world of noise and start becoming the one who cuts through it. To stop being persuaded and become persuasion itself, not as manipulation, not as control over others, but as conviction made visible, as truth embodied so completely that you become a mirror for those who've forgotten who they are. You want mind control? Control yours. You want to change people? Change yourself. You want to lead? Lead from within. Because once you own your thoughts, your decisions, your direction, once you claim your voice and stop letting the world write your script, then you don't just influence others. You awaken them. Not because you told them what to do, but because your life has become the evidence of what's possible when you do the one thing most people never do. Decide. And live like you meant it.